let's get this started. Nicolette and I prepared a whole PowerPoint for it, so let me get this going.
It's mostly Danny. It's all Danny.
All right, can everybody see this?
Yes, I could see it.
Thank you. All right, folks. So to get this started, couple quick introductions in case we have not met you officially before. My name is Danny Paskin. I am a professor in journalism and public relations in CLA, and I am also the G coordinator for the university, which is why I'm here today. And I'm happy to have my co-host, co-presenter with me.
Yeah, my name's Nicollette Brant. I'm a librarian for business and economics, at the university library, and I'm the current GEGC chair.
So, what are we going to do today? We are going to cover a couple main topics in this order. We're going to start with probably one of the main things that are in everybody's mind, which is the upcoming changes to the G policy. So we're going to talk quite a bit about that, cover what's changed, and give some tips about it. We are then going to cover how to develop a proposal for a GGC to review, the steps involved, what things you should keep in mind, and we are going to go through the actual submission process to get a course approved for GE on campus. And we are going to be doing Q&As. We are actually, and Nicolette, I'm sorry if this is a curveball for you, but instead of waiting for until the very end to do a Q&A, we're actually going to have prompts every now and then by the end of each one of those steps so that you can ask us your questions about each one of those. Because I know that people have more questions about one than the other. So instead of trying to remember what you're trying to ask until the very end, we'll have specific stops and prompts for you to do so. When you get a question, please do me a favor. Use the raise hand function on Zoom, which is the easiest way that we can keep track of everybody until the right moment and that we can know who is asking first and we can all follow a proper order. And thanks, Colleen, for the thumbs up. I appreciate that. So, with that in mind, let's start with the first topic of the day, which is changes to the G policy. And Nicolette, you are in charge of this one. Just let me know when you want me to switch slides.
Yes, so for the changes, yeah, you can go to the first one. So recently, I think two academic senate meetings ago, the new GEGC policy was officially approved by academic senate, and the main areas as far as proposals and submissions are concerned, where that impacts is the areas. So basically, we no longer have area E, which is lifelong learning and self-development. Thank you. And also, we no longer have the additional arts or humanities course. So instead of six Area C units, instead of nine Area C units, it's now six. So only two classes. So those are the two kind of major changes in the new GE policy as far as criteria and as far as the curriculum is concerned. And also, which doesn't really impact us so much, there in the laboratory requirement for I'm getting area
What
B.
used to be called Area B.
Yeah, what used to be called Area B, which is now three, which is now subject area three, um, is oh, so sorry, it's now two. I think it's now two. That's combined. So now you have a laboratory in B that's like required, but usually how we have it right now, we already kind of had that built into our curriculum. So that's not going to be as big as an impact for our campus. And those are pretty much the main changes. We have Area F, Ethnic Studies, which was um, before this GE policy. So that's a, new area there, but that was before this policy change. Other than that, that pretty much is like the core of these policy changes. And also the non-curriculum changes is the alphanumeric system in which these are now organized. So now instead of A is becoming one. So we have one A for oral communication, one B for written communication, one C for critical thinking. And math slash quantitative reasoning is now two. And then we have three. So instead of C, we have three, which is the arts and humanities. Four will be our area four will be social and behavioral sciences. Five will be now physical and life sciences. And then six is ethnic studies. So that's going to take some getting used to, I'm sure, for everybody. But those are just the alphanumeric changes. They don't really impact the curriculum or how you will, the learning outcomes that you're going to align these proposals to. But it will be a little bit confusing for a second getting the hang of those alphanumeric changes.
Yes, it will. If you look at this and going, oh my God, what have they done? Believe me, every single one of us throughout the CSU, and I've been talking to a lot of people in my same position in all the other campuses, we're all going, oh wow, we need to remember all this all over again. So we apologize. It was not a choice, it was mandated, but hopefully down the road we're going to get used to this. But yes, we're going to try as much as possible, at least in GGC, to refer to the areas by name so that we avoid this confusion because it's going to take a while until everybody remembers this. But yeah, we apologize and we obviously will understand if anybody confuses numberings and gets something wrong because of that. We will, of course, work with everybody on that.
Yes, and all of these changes were mandated, so they are not changes that we just threw in there for fun. They are all mandated by Cal GETC, which is the kind of document that our chancellor's office used um, to write a new executive order that kind of put all these changes in place based on a law that was passed. It's based on legislative changes. So these are all just requirements that we had to change. We are not doing this for fun.
Perfect. Thanks, Nicolette. A
Yeah.
couple of things to just add about the G policy itself. First of all these changes that we're talking about and the new G policy that Nicolette just mentioned, the Senate recently passed a meeting or two ago. Keep in mind, those are effective fall 2025. So for this academic year, we're still working with the old 2021 G policy. That's our ruling document until fall 2025 when all of these new changes kick in. So if any of your colleges or any of your faculty are going to be submitting things between now and fall 2025, we're still following the 2021 G policy. When fall 2025 kicks in, that's when we switch over. So yeah, we understand it's going to be a little tricky and people are already thinking ahead of what they're going to do. But just remember, for the time being, until we hear from the Senate a little more about this, we are following the fall 2021 G policy that we've been following for the last couple of years.
Except for Area E. We haven't heard back from Academic Senate yet, but it's unlikely that we will continue to, for this remaining semester, continue to approve courses for Area E. So we're inquiring about that right now with the Academic Senate.
Yeah. We're waiting to hear back from the Senate chair to see what our position on that. So for now, we're going, but we're waiting to hear from them on it. The couple other quick things that I wanted to raise about the G policy or what we expect would happen now is keep in mind one thing, especially about lower division C and E that Nicola just mentioned. Getting we're getting rid or area E is going away, lower division, and those three additional units of area C. We still have a number of students who are going to be, for at least a time being, in the OG patterns. And those students still need to take those two classes. So you probably still have need, still have demand for those two classes, at least for a little bit more, at least for a little bit longer. So if your colleges are immediately going, oh, we need to run away from these categories, we need to run away from these classifications, you're still going to have some need. That's why nowadays, if we get requests for we want to move from lower division E into another area, I usually write back to those proponents and say, hey, is there a chance that you could stay in area E for now and add something to it so that the students who still need the E can still take that class and get a credit for it? Of course, that means you need to still teach what area E teaches, but as long as you can still do that, that's our recommendation, that at least for the time being, for a year or so, that you keep that area E designation because there are still going to have students asking for those classes. But one big thing about this one, that doesn't mean if you think about moving from lower division E and to a new area, we still are going to judge our class for that new area based on the ruling G documents, based on the 2021 G policy, based on the GSLOs that we're going to talk about more in a little bit. What we usually talk about avoiding putting round pegs in squared holes. If you tell us, hey, I want to change my lower division or I want to add to my lower division E class a social science and behavior designation, great. GEGC is going to ask you, how does that class fit lower division D? You're still going to have to show us the criteria. You have to show us all the components that truly show how that class is a lower division D class. So if that's in your mind, if you see a lot of those things coming through your college, if you're in the dean's office, keep reminding folks of that, that please, those classes still need to comply with the requirements of those areas in order to be certified. So that's a one big request that we make to everybody who's considering moving their area E-class somewhere else or adding something else to their area E-class.
Yes, and in the new GE policy, so there's no change in the learning outcomes. So if you use, the learning outcomes that are current, that they're not going to change when the new GE policy comes around in fall 2025. So you can still base the pedagogy and the content of the course on what we have right now.
All right, and on that note, Nicollette, unless you have any other comments about the G policy, I'm gonna bring this slide up and see if anybody has a question about the G policy itself, about what we just discussed before we move on to our next topics. And I am totally okay if nobody raised their hand because we were completely clear, everything is great, and we can just keep moving. Okay, Natalie, I see your mic is on. Do you have a question?
Oh, no, I just joined. I just finished class.
Oh, hi, sorry. Welcome. All right, folks, sounds like we are good with the G policy and we're ready to move on to our next topic for the day. Thanks, Colleen. I really appreciate that, by the way. All right, folks, so let's talk a little bit about actually developing a proposal for GEGC. And again, Nicollette, feel free to jump in anytime you feel like. When you're talking about develop a proposal, there are three documents that you need to look at or work with. And they should probably go in this order when you're thinking about it. You have the G policy document, you have the GSLOs document, you have the G form. The G policy is a policy that we've been talking about, the old policy, the upcoming new policy. These are the rules. These are the things that we're mandated to look at by the Academic Senate, by the Chancellor's Office, to see if a course fits a specific area or areas. And let me show you what the current 2021 document looks like. Here we go. As most of you probably know, it's a fairly long document with a lot of details on it, but it's actually really well divided. So if you want to submit a class to a specific area, you just look for the area. And I'm going to, for example, area A1, oral communication, area A2. And here it explains to you what a class in that area is expected to do, what class in that area is supposed to talk about. And then as you go, it talks a little bit more about specifics of each one of them. So this is our Bible. This is the document that you have to go through in order to go, I'm thinking about asking for a critical thinking designation for my class. Is my class able to do what critical thinking expects you to do? So that's the first question they need to ask yourself when thinking about developing that. It is also the first question that if you're on the other side, if you're on a G committee, if you're in a curriculum committee, if you're in the college curriculum committee, if you're in the dean's office, and you receive a request from a faculty member to approve a class, to recommend a class for one of these areas, we also would really, really, really appreciate if at all those levels you would stop and look and see if those classes being proposed do fit into those areas. Are they doing what GGC will expect? And here's the reason why. Because when you get to the GGC, and we're going to talk about those steps a little more in details in a little bit, we in GGC will ask all those questions. And if we don't see an answer to those questions, we'll then have to stop the process of reviewing the courses, send it back to the colleges or send it back to the proponents and say, hey, we started looking into this, but we're wondering about A, B, C, D, and E. If you're able to catch that early on, that will most likely speed up the process tremendously and make this way more fluid so that by the time that it gets to us, there were a couple different pairs of eyes looking into all of this, checking for all of that, so that when it gets to us, we are good to go.
And
So,
I also, oh,
sorry, go
sorry,
ahead.
in here. I also recommend when you're looking into this that you look at the classes that are currently approved in each area because it can give you an idea of the type of content that we're looking for. Because sometimes a class can be related to, say, for instance, like it could be related to social sciences, but does it meet the general education criteria for social sciences? So a kind of a good measure for that is to look at what we currently have. And I'm going to put the link right here. This is the student's record link for fall 2021 GE requirements. If you scroll down to each area, you can see what's been approved for different categories.
Thank you. So the G policy document will give it a criteria, as Nicollette was referring to. Will give you any requirements for prereqs for the class and those kind of details. There is, however, one more thing that you need to think of and one more thing that the class needs to do in order to be approved for a specific G area, which is to cover the learning outcomes that are required for that G area. And let me bring up the document that you should look at in order to do it. Oops, sorry. Let me make sure that I have the right document up. There we go. This is the GE SLOs document. Everybody sees that? And Nicollette, you're my cue for, is that working? Because from my end, it
Yes,
looks good. Thank
yes, it
you.
looks good. Sorry, I'm putting in the link where they could find these documents in the chat.
Gotcha. So, this is the GE SLOs document. This is a document that was approved by the Academic Senate that all classes, all courses that are covering each area need to cover these learning outcomes. If you notice, every area has its own required learning outcomes, and some areas also have, especially at the upper division level, some required and some optional, where it says choose at least one. That means that if you're applying, for example, for upper division B, we expect your class to have these two required learning outcomes, meaning students at the end of the semester will be able to do these two things, and then they'll also have to do at least one of these supplemental ones. So either A, B, or C. And this document, which was worked for a long time at a bunch of different levels, has a very detailed list of all of those. So when you're developing a course or when you're reviewing a course proposal that's asking for those, we do expect these to be present. And we'll talk about how exactly that should be presented in a couple minutes. But this is your second major document that covers the learning outcomes for the class. So you did your G policy document to look at the criteria, to look at the prereqs. Then you look at this document to look at the actual learning outcomes that you're required to cover in the class, that somebody teaching a class is supposed to cover. And then once you get those two down, then it's time to actually submit to GEGC. And for that, you use the G form that we've been using in GEGC for the past few years. This form, by the way, is the very same one from last year. We did not make any changes between a year ago and this year. Every now and then we do some updates in the summer to address some questions that came up or to make the form even better, to address some suggestions that we received. There were no changes made this past summer, so it's still the same form that we saw from the last academic year. And in here, you're going to see that it's asking for basic information from the course, your catalog description. The one big suggestion and recommendation that I give about the catalog description is keep an eye on your prereqs. This is a point where we often have to go back to the proponents, back to the colleges, and say, hey, this looks great, but it's missing the required prereq, which is listed in the G policy. So make sure that when you give us the catalog description here, it does include the prerequisites for the class to comply with GE, aside from obviously any course-specific prereqs. And we do give you a couple of tips on what those prereqs should be in the form itself right here. We ask you some other basic questions. We asked you to tell us what you're applying for, or if there are some old designations that you want to continue or delete. And then we ask you for the justification. The justification should be, as we describe here, really your elevator pitch. You have a couple paragraphs, a really short little time to tell us how does this class fit in the G area or areas that you're applying for. This is where the criteria from the class, the part that comes from the G policy, really comes in. The G policy expects you to do this. Or is your class going to do it? Convince us of it in a very short, quick paragraph. Why should this class be certified for it? So we don't expect you to write a few pages about it. We would want you not to do that. Just a couple quick paragraphs telling us here's how it fits the criteria for the class. Learning outcomes. Here we ask you for two separate things. In the first box in 6A, we're asking you to list all the SLOs for the class. All the SLOs that come from the standard course outline that you have already for the course. Unrelated to G, just copy and paste it here, and that's it. We just want to know what those are. Most of the time, we don't even usually discuss it unless something looks odd. Usually, we just want to see what those are. And then here is where the GSLOs come in. Again, the GSLOs come from the GSLO document. So make sure you go open it up. And what we're asking you to do in this box is to simply copy and paste initially each one of the required or whichever optional SLOs you choose from the GSLO document to cover. And then for each one of those, give us in your own words an explanation of how the class will address that. How will the class, how will the teachers teaching the class, the professor, how will they be covering those? How will they be teaching those so the students are able to actually learn what they're supposed to learn? So it's not a matter of repeating what the SLO says. It's simply tell us which SLO you're talking about, give us a text, and then in your own words, very simple, very clearly, tell us, here's how we're going to do that. Nicollette, anything you want to add before I move on?
Um, yeah, I want to add that just keep in mind that the committee is comprised of faculty across different departments, so they're probably not going to be experts in your area that you're discussing here. So um, when you're writing about this, how students are going to meet those learning outcomes, try to communicate that in a way that still someone knowledgeable, you know, another faculty member would be able to understand it, not being an expert in your field.
Thank you for raising that issue. All right, folks, the couple last steps or the couple last fields of this form, we ask for the course assessment. This is a place where you literally just tell us what assignments are students going to do. Give us a short description of this. And here's why this is extremely important. Every now and then we get an assignment listed as, for example, a paper. Great. That's a great assignment. It's extremely useful for the students. But we need to know what the paper is about. What is the paper going to assess really? What is it going to prompt students to talk about? If you're talking about an assignment with a really cool name, which we see often, it sounds fantastic, but we don't exactly know what it does. So give us one or two short sentences here that tell, again, quoting what Nicollette just said, somebody who's not in your field, somebody who's not in the class, to know what that assignment is actually doing, what the assignment is asking students to talk about. And then in the next column, tell us what GSLOs from the ones that you listed up here in 6B, that's going to be assessing, and finally the percentage of the grade for the course. So most of this people should already have from their own syllabi, from their own SEOs. We're just asking for a little more detail here to explain to us.
I want to add something to that. The GE SLOs covered, if any, I would suggest that you really think about which SLOs the assignment corresponds to. We get a lot of forms where just every SLO is listed for most assignments, and you don't want to do that to yourself because these are going to be, we have a new kind of relatively new committee geek who's going to be looking through all these forms and really evaluating whether or not these assessments are actually covering those SLOs. And so I would be really like selective when you're lining those up or aligning those. That's all.
See, that's why I love having you here. You can give everybody those tips and remind everybody of that. All right. The next big step over here is outline the subject matter week by week, just like most of us, just like most faculty have in their syllabi. give us the week by week. Again, give us a quick description of what that week means. And for the same reason of the assessment, sometimes you have a topic that's listed in the week by week that may have a really cool name, but people outside your field, especially, may not know what that actually means, what that actually teaches. So give us, again, a one or two short sentences for each new topic telling us what that actually means to people not in your field. And then, once again, which GSLOs are covered within that topic within that week. And finally, you have the bibliography. And the one big tip that I'm going to give you, or the one request that I'm going to ask you here, is please make sure that when you're listing this, that you actually tell us which one of those, including if it's all of them, are related to the G area or sub areas being covered. So you can still copy and paste your whole bibliography here. Just make a note of these are the ones related to these areas that I'm asking about, so that we can look immediately into those and go like, oh yes, I can see how somebody will be able to read those texts and use them to prepare a class to teach G for these designations. And the only other thing I'm going to ask to add to that is we do ask that among those, especially related to GE, you do have at least a few fairly new references. So within the past 2 or 3 years as well as part of it, so that not every single reference is 10, 20 years old, as we did see a few times in GGC. Um, Librarian, anything you want to add about bibliography?
Yes, this is a very important aspect of the form, especially this kind of is where a lot of the committee members look to when they're looking at whether or not the course is covering the core kind of foundational like methods and methods basically of that area is in the bibliography. So you really want to pay attention to that, making and also make sure that the content in the bibliography is appropriate to the area. So you do want recent things like from within the past 2 or 3 years. But if you're applying for something like Constitution and American Ideals or US history, make sure that there are that in your bibliography, you're listing those primary sources as well, the primary source material. So make sure that the bibliography reflects the area appropriately and the foundations of that area. So um, having something in the bibliography that is going to communicate to faculty that this course is covering, like the core methods of that area or of that discipline is very encouraged, I would say, just watching people that are evaluating the forms.
And I know I'm preaching to the choir by talking to all of you about this, but remember, when it comes to bibliography, we're not just talking about books. We're talking about books, we're talking about journal articles, we're talking about newspaper articles or news articles. We're talking about audio content, visual content, videos of any kind. Those are all the materials that a faculty member would be using to prepare the class. So anything that can be used as a reference to prepare the class can be added here as part of the bibliography for us, and then just highlight or mark to us which ones are G related to those areas or not. And if you're asking for more than one sub area, just make sure to tell us which one applies to which one. So this reference relates to the first G area that I'm asking for. This one relates to the second one. You can either do that by putting a note at the end of each listing, or you can just divide them in little areas within the bibliography. So you put a little subheader saying G area A1, and then you put another subheader saying G area C3, or whatever the new codes are going to be, which I totally did not memorize yet.
Yes, and this is kind of something that's not out there, but I don't think has necessarily been mentioned before. You can, consult with the librarian for your subject discipline on this area of your GE form if you wish, because we have experts in these areas. A lot of the librarians are experts in these different areas. And so if you don't have recent items currently, they can help you find those. So I would highly suggest that, just promoting librarians, me promoting librarians.
All right, and finally, we have a little acknowledgement section here that we just need people to read and make sure to check to tell us that they read it. And then the signatures over here that we need. And we're going to allude to that a little bit in a minute, but just remember, before it gets to GGC, this needs to go through the chair of the curriculum committee of the department or the department curriculum committee at large. This needs to be approved by the department chair. It needs to be approved by the college curriculum committee, and it needs to be approved by the dean's office. So we do need all of these steps before it gets to GGC. If we're missing any signatures here, we usually, that's one of those points that we stop for a second. We go back to the college, we go back to the proponents and say, hey, we're missing a step, we're missing a signature. Can you please go back and double check and get that before we can see it? So please make sure you have all of these here before you send it to us. All right, let me switch back to the presentation because that's the prompt for any questions about that. Any questions about developing a G proposal? Dr. Dunigan, what's up?
Hey, so I am curious about the suggestion to check out the other courses in the area simply because people don't have access to anything other than titles for the other courses in the area. So that seems to suggest that they're supposed to evaluate based on very little information. Does that make sense? So it's like I understand like going to look at it, but really like looking at what's been approved just gives us a sense of the history. It doesn't actually tell somebody how to revise. So it's kind of like a comment question, concern that I'm expressing.
That's a good question. As far as like a general description, you can find that course in the catalog where you can see more information about it. But then the form, I don't, that would be more of a Danny question because I don't know if sorry to put this on you, Danny, but for
Yeah.
forms that have been approved, I don't know if we can like share all of those kind of openly for others to refer to. I'm not sure if there are restrictions on that.
So I'm going to talk more about that in a minute on the next final section. But since you're raising that, Colleen, here are my tips that I would give for that part. One, anybody can always come to us, to Nicollette and me, to ask for input and questions and advice at any stage when they're developing these courses. But also, what I have done in the past for examples for sharing those forms is I reached to a proponent that got the form approved, somebody who came to GGC and got the form approved, then went with flying colors and be a great example. And I tell them like, hey, there's somebody else who would really profit from seeing your course, what you did. Would you be okay with my sharing with them your course as an example? And 99.9% of the time they say, yeah, sure, whatever. But I still just take that step just to make sure that the faculty who wrote all that is okay with it. And then I share. And quite often also they say yes, and feel free to tell them to reach out to me if they want any tips. So we also work as a bridge between the people who got their course approved and people who are considering getting a course approved in the same area to share some tips. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I know that, and I have like I'm aware of because you know that I've seen like a wide variety of GE forms. I just don't know that it's yeah. I'm also aware of the fact that it's like you're really only going to get to look at like one of them. Looking at the list of the classes and looking at catalog descriptions is not going to tell you. very much at all because the catalog descriptions aren't written for this purpose. So that's all. I don't know that it's like,
Yeah, it's a weird fine line between we want to make as much information available to people to help them
yeah,
do their new proposals
yeah,
and the intellectual property and feeling like people are sharing way too much of their own course when they don't want to. And that's a line that we're still very carefully going around. So
yeah,
the way that we manage that so far is what I said is we make the bridge, we contact people, we ask, are you okay if we share this? Would you like to talk to them about it? And thankfully, so far, that's worked out pretty well. So
yeah.
just
I
keep
just think
going.
it's like I just wouldn't give the advice of looking at the list. That's kind of the point that I'm making is that I don't know that
Gotcha.
it makes sense. That's all.
Gotcha. Appreciate that. All
I
right.
need to run
Any
to the
other
vet.
questions
I need to run
about
to the vet. I need to head out, Danny. I'm sorry. I let Danny know that I had to
go
leave
for
early
it? You
today.
have important
Dog
things to
appointment.
do, and
Oh,
we just have one more thing to cover really quick before we wrap up ourselves.
okay.
So, any other questions about developing a G course before we move on? All right. So the last step, and this is not going to take too long because most of you already know this, just a refresher, about the submission process. So you or somebody in your college did their course, somebody in the college is ready to actually get the course certified for GE. What happens then? Like we said, the first step is getting the course approved by the department, by the college. You get the department curriculum committee, you get a chair, you get the college curriculum committee, you get the associate dean, all of those to approve your course or recommend your course and put their signatures in the form itself. And as we ask, and I'm going to ask this a million times, at all stages, we ask all of these people involved to please ask the question, is the course fulfilling what's required to be in the G area? If you do that at the department stage, at the college stage, and very politely tell faculty, hey, we love this, but you may have a little trouble in GGC because you're not really answering this or that. When it gets to us, they already addressed it, and we can go, ooh, this looks beautiful. Let's certify this course. And it makes life so much easier for everybody. So we ask all of you involved to please ask yourselves, ask everybody else these questions. And at any point, if you as a reviewer or if you as a proponent have any questions or need anything, you can reach out to us through a very simple GEGC email, which is gegc@csulb.edu. That email goes both to me as G coordinator and to Nicollette as the GGC chair, or whoever the GGC chair at that point is. So anybody, anytime they need any help, use that email. You can reach both of us really quickly at once. So you got approval from the college and department. Then the college is the one that submits the signed form with all those signatures that we're talking about to GGC. And the only thing we need is that signed G form with all the content. We do not need SEOs or samples of anything. We literally just need that form that we talked about because it contains all the information that GGC needs to find in order to approve a class. Send us that form with the signatures to that email and you're good to go. But again, we do expect to get that from the colleges. And the reason for that is that one, it becomes much easier to keep track of. If we start getting emails from different faculty members at different stages and different things, we're not totally sure what's going on, and sometimes we lose track of it. And also, that way we know that if the college is sending it to us, then it already went through the college, it got college approval, it got approval from the dean or associate dean, and we know that it's at the right stage for us to look at it. If we get it from a faculty member, we are not totally sure if you went through college or not. We need to look at the signatures, and even then, it may become a little tricky to figure that out. Once the college sends it to us, it goes through an initial review by GEGC Executive Committee. And that's just to check on the procedure part of it. Is the form completely filled? Is there anything big over here that would prompt us to stop review and GGC at large, the whole committee, would send it back anyway? Is there anything that we can help those proponents right at the beginning to make this review easier so that when the whole committee looks at it, they're not the big questions that we know they're going to ask anyway? So that's why we have that initial review by exec. Executive committee does not deny or accept proposals. We do not grant or deny certifications. They literally just look at the form and go, okay, this is ready for review, or no, it's still missing some things. The certification, the approval or denial of a request, comes from step number 4, which is the review by GGC as a whole. It comes here, it gets reviewed. Sometimes GGC at large still has some questions. We send it back to the colleges, we send it back to the proponents and say, hey, could you address those? Bring it back to us. Or we just go, nope, this looks great. That's exactly what we wanted. Approved. If it's approved, we then send it as a recommendation to CPC, which is a council that oversees GGC. Technically, GGC recommends a class. CPC is the one that officially approves it as part of the university. And then it is put on something called the G supplement, which is a list of all the courses approved in the past semester for the university to officially implement the course. So this is technically the six steps that a course goes from, okay, I have it ready. What do I do with it? How do I get it approved until it's actually implemented and we can start offering credit for it? Now, one tip or one heads up about this, which many of you already know. Classes are approved, quote unquote, a year ahead of time. Meaning, for example, if we GGC approved a class this semester, fall 20, we approved the class this semester in fall 2024, it goes into effect fall 2025. So there's always a 2 semester lag, a 2 semester delay between approval by GGC and the class actually going to the books and actually granting credit for G. And the reason for that, if you're wondering, is because we need to create this G supplement with the whole list. We then send it to the university to actually put it in the system, which takes a little while. And we need to do all of that before students actually start enrolling for classes. Because we all know that students who enroll in, say, fall 2025 actually enroll in the classes in the middle of spring 2024. It needs to already be in the system before that mid-spring 2024 date. So that's why we need to do it way ahead of time in order for all those pieces to fall into place. For the students to see that when they go online to register, for it to be granting credit for the class itself. So we do apologize. We wish we could do these way faster than that, but that is the deadline. That's the timeline that the university told us that we need to follow for it. And the last thing that I need to remind you of or give you a heads up is the deadlines. With all that in mind, we do have submission deadlines for GEGC. And these deadlines are, and here's a big tip, for the fall, they're always the second Monday of October. And for the spring, they're always the fourth Monday of March. We put the actual dates on the GGC website, which is csulb.edu/GGC. So you can always find this there. But if you want to put it in your calendars for years to come, we actually managed to get the university to agree that the deadline for fall is always the second Monday of October. The deadline for spring is always the fourth Monday of March. That being said, these deadlines are the deadlines that if you send this to us by this date, we guarantee you we'll review the class before the end of that semester. So send it to us by the second Monday of October, and your class will for sure be reviewed this fall. Send it to us by the fourth Monday of March, the class will for sure be reviewed in the spring. But if you send it to us after this deadline, we will still do the best that we can. We'll give everything we can to fit your class into our review process, into our cycle, and still review it this semester. But we can't guarantee. If all of a sudden we get a flood of reviews, a flood of requests towards the end of the semester, we may not get to it before the end of the semester, and it may get bumped by a semester, meaning certification would take one extra semester to kick in. We apologize for that. We'll do our best, but we can't make any promises. But if you send it to us by these dates, we guarantee you you'll be reviewed before the end of the semester and you get your yes or no. On that note, this is my last slide. Any final questions that we can answer before we wrap this up? Antonella, go ahead, please.
Hi, thank you, Dani, for the presentation. I have two questions actually.
Mhm.
One is regarding the submission. Once we submit it, it has to go through the process, it has to be approved. Is it possible to have a retroactive certification? What I mean, no, okay,
No, we asked that question several times to the university. From my understanding, and don't quote me because I'm just giving my interpretation, system-wise, procedurally wise, it's extremely hard for them to do it retroactively to try and figure out what students took the class in previous semesters to give that. So we've
okay.
always been told that it kicks in at that specific point and it goes from that point forward. Sorry.
My next question might be not this the place to ask, but I will anyway, is the waivers that we have for the current policy. Is there we apply to continue to have those waivers in the categories that were moved to the new policy? Is there any decision or news about how the waivers, because that will make a big impact on us in terms of, classes and decisions to submit application for G certification.
Um, just because I'm not the person in charge of the waivers, I'm gonna tell you to actually go to the person who is.
Okay.
Talk to Pei Fang Hong, the
Yeah.
interim AVP. I believe she actually knows the answer to that.
Okay. Yeah, we
Because I
have been
was,
in touch with him and Jody at the time she was in charge of it, but somehow we still don't know if our requests
yeah,
have been accepted or not. So I was hoping to get an answer soon.
I just happened to be in a thread where
Uh-huh.
Pei Fang was part of, where that question was asked, and she seemed to know the answer to
Okay.
it.
I'll
So,
talk to her. Yeah, I'll
as a
talk.
good journalist, I'll tell you to go to the source of the information instead of my try to relate to you.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure. All right, folks, any other questions before we wrap this up for today? If not, thank you so, so much. And again, my last comment is if you or your faculty need anything at any point, please reach out to Nicollette, to me directly, and we're always happy to help at any stage, especially early on. If you know somebody's thinking about a class, tell them to come to us. Tell them to come and ask for help at any stage, even very early on, and we're happy to at any point. So, with that said, thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day and week, and we'll see you around.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.